Now, the new infatuation with nuclear energy is continuing right around the world, which is another reason Peter Dutton has been smart to push this issue. We spoke about nuclear energy on the program last night, of course, and there was a ceremony overnight in South Korea heralding the start or the resumption of construction on 2 more nuclear energy plants to boost that country's reliable and emissions-free electricity supplies. The point here is that South Korea is one of those countries, quite a few of them around the world, that decided a few years ago to scale back on their nuclear ambitions. But it's recognised now that that was a mistake, and it's now doing the opposite.
South Korea already has 25 reactors in operation, which can take up to 10 years to build. Seoul plans to resume construction on 2 reactors this year and ramp up nuclear power to more than 30% of total energy production by 2030.
A significant portion of South Korea's GDP depends on trade. In the near future, electricity will become the key power source of what we call the 4th Industrial Revolution. That means cheaper electricity will help us sharpen our competitive edge.
South Korea is a top 10 global energy consumer, with energy-intensive industries, especially electronics, shipbuilding, and petrochemicals, driving the country's economy. Reducing energy costs is paramount.
Yeah, they need lots of power to fuel industry, and nuclear can do that cheaply. In Australia, we pretend that we want manufacturing to do well, but we kill it off with expensive and unreliable electricity. We're hurting ourselves. This is the national self-harm I keep talking about, while other countries are making themselves stronger. Yet today we heard from the Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen again, pretending that nuclear is too expensive and that renewable energy is the cheapest solution. This is willful ignorance. Have a look at what he said. There is no nuclear facility around the world under construction which isn't currently taking major delays and major cost blowouts from $5 billion to $9 billion, he said, sounding suddenly like he cares about the cost of electricity infrastructure. Even proponents of small modular reactors conceded they cost $5 billion, which is a lot of billions for not many megawatts, says Chris Bowen. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. That's before you even get to the talk about social licence. Social licence? He wants a social licence for nuclear energy? What he's really saying is there'll be political resistance, especially from his own party's socialist left faction, Albo's faction. The right choice for Australia should be worth fighting for in the caucus and publicly. Instead of pleading for a social licence, Labor should show some leadership. Our politicians, Liberal and Labor, didn't ask for a social alliance to make our electricity more expensive and less reliable, did they? But they want a social licence to try to fix it. And what about that hypocritical nonsense on cost blowouts? Cost is a big factor, of course, we know that, and nuclear projects have blown out. But nuclear requires next to nothing by way of new transmission infrastructure. So there's a saving straight up of about $100 billion for Australia. How many nuclear plants would that build? And how many farms and how much bushland and how many kilometres of coastline would also be saved from solar farms and wind turbines and transmission lines? On top of that, of course, nuclear plants last 70 or 80 years, maybe longer, whereas the solar and wind infrastructure will need to be replaced 4 times over that period. So times their cost by 4. And as for nuclear projects and costs and project delays, this is coming from Blackout Bowen, who backed the so-called Sun Cable project to build a massive solar farm in the desert and send power to Singapore. That pipe dream has already been mothballed. Numerous projects have fallen over. Of course, wave machines have rusted in the ocean as a never-ending procession of rent seekers tries to get their hands on government renewable subsidies. But if Blackout Bowen really wants to talk about cost blowouts for very few megawatts, he only needs to look at a project he inherited and he continues to back. The Snowy 2.0 project is a green dream, a renewables project pushed by Malcolm Turnbull and the other net zero evangelists. The Snowy project is in strife. It's delayed by at least 6 years, costs are blowing out, and some experts have told us it should be scrapped altogether. but on they go under Labor. It looks like costing $20 billion when you factor in transmission connections, rather than the $2 billion quoted at the start. That's a tenfold increase, a tenfold cost blowout. And the punchline with this project, Bowen's new renewables baby, the punchline is that all this money, all this waste, all these transmission lines through the bush, none of it actually produces a single watt of extra electricity. Yeah, the Snowy 2.0 project just stores what we might be able to produce otherwise with solar and wind. It's just a big battery, a $20 billion renewable battery. And Bowen scoffs at nuclear as too expensive. Obviously, you don't need a social licence to apply double standards.